Welcome back to Deck Building with Bahumaut. This week we're going to look at the unified capabilities of the human type. Now, with the latest expansion there has been a few nice additions to the human creature pool that give us a few more options when building up a human themed deck. So basically, think of this as the magic version of Zergling from StarCraft. The idea here is that you use several humans which increase all humans on your side power and toughness whenever you attack or defend. So to begin with, we'll look in the green color and start putting it together. Okay, one of our main points of interest straight off the bat is Heretic Captain. So you can see 2 mana for a 2/2, fair enough, decent value, but his other ability is one of the things that interests us. So you can see there he's a very nice support unit, and while he can be fragile, as your opponent may target him, there are other ways to protect him that we will be adding into the deck. So I'll put all 3 of him in. Now, since our colors are going to be white and green, as that's the primary locations of humans, Veteran Cathar works extremely well with this deck. So, once again, 2 mana for a 2/2, fair enough, but the 4 mana activated ability that you can see there gives any human you control double strike. And of course, triggering that mid-combat can be extremely brutal. Now, we can also combine it with the generation capabilities of Hanweir Militia Captain. Because you can see this actually overlaps with a couple of other human cards, which can give us great benefit. So, since we have a lot of cheap human creatures, it's quite likely that our Militia Captain will flip, transforming into Westvale Cult Leader. And Westvale Cult Leader for 2 mana is very, very effective. So it generates additional 1/1 humans, and its power and toughness are equal to the number of creatures you control. And since we have a lot of cheap creatures, that's extremely powerful. Now combine that spawn generation with Thalia's Lieutenant. So as you can see, whenever a human enters the battlefield under your control, it gains more power, and if you play Thalia's Lieutenant, all other humans that you control at that point gain +1/+1. So in either situation it's extremely useful, but with the generation capabilities of Militia Captain, once flipped, it can be a progressively more and more powerful threat on the battlefield. So both of those can go in. And once again, in also a combination with the Militia Captain, you can add in Pious Evangel. Because whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. That includes tokens generated by the Militia Captain. Plus, of course, with our large number of creatures in the deck, you should be playing creatures quite consistently. So gaining a little bit of life per turn. Now, another one of our stat increase cards during a attack is Steadfast Cathar, and also he's another human as well, so he'll gain all those additional bonuses. So 2 mana for 2/1. Normally, that's not that great, but the addition of +0/+2 when attacking, since this deck is going to revolve around offense, can be quite helpful. And of course, if you can gain effects like Vigilance or Trample or enchantments that give it flying, for example, you can make it much more of a threat on the battlefield. So as you can see, we have a decent core of creatures here at this point. Now, if you wanted to make it a life gain based deck, you could include Cleric of the Forward Order. Putting all 4 of those in there, that will give you a nice life gain ability that continually increases as the battle goes on. And of course it's human as well, so it will trigger all those human effects. You can also think of including Lone Rider as another human, because it gains a lot of stacking abilities. Although of course once it flips it's no longer human, so it can lose some of that potential. And you can also probably see at this point the main flaw in this deck so far is the lack of being able to deal with flying. Now in that regard you have 2 choices. You can either go for cheap removal spells to get rid of flyers, such as Celestial Flare, Gideon's Reproach, or any variety of white removal spells. There are quite a lot. Or you can include Nimbus Wings and other flying enchantments. In today's case, I'd rather include a few spells that have the Escalate ability, as they allow you to choose which effect you want to go into play. So in our case we can include a few Blessed Alliances and also Collective Efforts, as they give us multiple options when dealing with opponents. Also there's the Continually Useful Always Watching, which can be added in. And another very useful human we have for slowing down your opponent is Thalia. Because of the second ability you can see there, creatures in non-basic lands your opponent controls enter the battlefield tapped. Now that means that your opponent can't play a creature and defend in the same phase, so that can be extremely handy with the offensive nature of our deck, as it slows down your opponent's defense. Another extremely useful removal spell, Declaration in Stone. It's a great way to get rid of tokens, and also has the exile effect, which of course the downside is it does create investigate tokens. The exile effect I think makes up for it. And we should definitely add in Kytheon, due to his nature of continual annoyance. Plus he's extremely cheap for 1 white mana. And if he gains the bonuses from Thalia's Lieutenant and Hamlet Captain, he can be an extremely annoying attacker. Now of course, since this is an offensive-minded deck, Make a Stand works very well with it. So you should at least have a couple of those in your deck as well. Now an interesting new addition as well is Heron's Grace Champion. So as you can see, green and white. 3/3, flash, lifelink, and buffs up all other humans, and gives them all lifelink until end of turn, which can be extremely game changing if triggered at the right time. Now of course there's lots of variations you can make to this deck. You can add Impulse of Mirasa to gain your creatures back and gain some life if they get killed off. You can include Wild Size to make it more offensive and to draw more cards quickly. In our case though, we might include Dustwatch Recruiter. Now while you may not initially think about him, his ability to continually allow you to look for more creature cards to replenish your supplies is a great boon to your ability to maintain your assault. Whereas normally, if you don't draw enough creatures, you just run out of steam and your opponent will end up walking over you. And often that's the case with when you're reversing decks that are extremely heavy on kill spells. So they'll wipe out all your creatures and then basically chip away at you while you continually try and draw more creatures to make up for those that you've lost. In this case, you can, because the 2/2 isn't particularly much of a threat, often he'll be overlooked, but since you have 3 in your deck, you have a decent chance of drawing them. And the fact that you can use them to replenish your resources of creatures can be quite handy. Also, if he does get flipped, it's just a flat 1 reduction cost to all creatures you cast. And another nice game-changing card we have here is Fog. Of course, it depends on if your opponent is using a creature deck or if they're using a spell deck. So, of course, while Fog will counter combat damage, it will not work on non-combat damage. So, it's slightly temperamental, that one. And that's it. Takes us to 36, and we're going to be using our Evolving Wilds, so we'll be using a few more lands than usual. So we'll put in our 4 Evolving Wilds, which will make sure we have our mana types that we need. We'll put in one Rogue's Passage to break stalemates, and we'll put in all 3 Blighted Steps due to our large number of creatures and creature generation that can be extremely useful. We don't need any additional different types, so we'll be putting in remaining just regular lands, and that gives us our 60 cards. So we'll move on to our star ratings and also our breakdown. So as you can see, we have a majority of low cost cards, so our deck speed is going to be very high. We have a large percentage of creatures, so as you can see, it's a creature focused deck. Of course, we do have some spell support for creature removal that's flying threat or particularly hard to get past. And we have our high land amount to make sure that we always have what we need. We'll check our star ratings. So you can see there, as I said, extremely high speed. We have good strength, good control, and very good synergy. So pretty much good stats across the board, as you can see by a lot of the beneficial effects that work together. And so with that, we'll move on to test, and off we go. Okay, that looks like a good variety. We have all the required mana we need. We have a lot of our cheap starting creatures. So definitely a good starting hand. And we'll use our Evolving Wilds straight away so they don't slow our mana gain later. Get our Hamlet Captain into play very quickly. And our Thalia next. To help slow down our opponent. And of course, First Strike is a very nice offensive and defensive capability. Of course, we can double up our creatures next turn, so we have 2 cheap ones. And as you can see, thanks to Thalia's Lieutenant, our creatures are now powerful enough to get past the 2-1 that's on the field. So we can get in a free attack. So you can see the complementary abilities there starting to work together. That's fine. So you can see our opponent having to waste multiple spells to deal with our creatures. And make sure to always cast your Pious Evangel before any other creatures if possible, so you gain additional life. So you can see if you get a decent draw of a few creatures, it's very hard for a spell deck to keep up with the amount of creatures you produce, especially if you're using Duskwatch Recruiter to help supplement your hand. So you can see even though they've killed off a few of our creatures, they really have to use a lot of their spells to slow you down. And that's fine because we can keep getting more creatures. And if you keep the pressure on your opponent, it makes it tough for them to respond. Now this is another great one to trigger during an offense, and once you have enough spare mana, it's very good at dealing with stalemate situations. So the thing is, I can attack with all creatures that I want, and whatever's blocked that would be killed, I can protect by triggering that activated ability. So as you can see there, they could get rid of one of my recruiters, but not if I give my recruiter first strike and barrel past. So you can see that unless they're extremely heavy on the kill spells, there's no way for them to keep up. So boomerang, all that kind of thing doesn't really matter because our spells are quite cheap. We can just replay them again. And we're not relying on equipment. Equipment or enchantments, really. So it doesn't matter if our creatures are boomeranged or not. And especially if our Thalia's Lieutenant is still out, we're getting the additional effect of recasting the same spells over and over again. So if anything, it's just causing more problems for our opponent to keep boomeranging our cards. And so you can see, it's an effective use of complementary abilities, and it's very easily customizable in whatever way you want. So you can lean it towards life gain, you can lean it towards more removal, or of course you can just add more creatures and just make it so that you can swarm your opponent with heaps and heaps of creatures. So the choice is yours, and it's a very effective deck. Overall, quite simple, but feel free to suit it to your whims. That's it for this week. I'll